recent years, cases that once seemed destined to fade into silence have begun to speak again. Files buried for decades are reopening, and with the help of modern forensic science, forgotten evidence is finally revealing what it has carried all along. Tonight, we step into a series of investigations that refuse to stay unsolved. Stories where patience, technology, and quiet persistence pulled long-hidden truths back into the light. Annette Schnee and Bobby Joe Oberholzer. In 1982, near Breckenridge, Colorado, the bodies of two young women were discovered in separate locations dozens of miles apart. At first, investigators believed the incidents were unrelated, separated by time and distance. Yet subtle similarities, and one unusual clue, a bright orange sock, would eventually connect both cases and lead to a shocking truth. On January 6, 1982, 29-year-old Bobby Joe Oberholzer left home at 7:15 in the morning. Like many times before, she hitchhiked to work. She and her husband Jeff had been married for about 4 years and lived in Alma, roughly 20 kilometers from where her body would later be found. That evening, Bobby called Jeff to say she planned to meet friends after work. He offered to pick her up, but she replied that someone would give her a ride home. Jeff prepared dinner and waited. At some point he fell asleep and woke close to midnight. Bobby had not returned. Alarmed, he drove toward Breckenridge. Her friends told him she had left the bar around 7:30 p.m., and they assumed she had found a ride. Jeff went to the police immediately, but officers declined to open a case so soon after her disappearance. Bobby was an adult, they explained, and there was no sign of immediate danger. All he could do was wait. The next morning, a farmer living about 50 kilometers from Breckenridge found a driver's license in his field bearing Bobby Joe Oberholzer's name. When Jeff and two friends arrived to retrieve it, they discovered more troubling signs. Bobby's blue backpack lay in the snow, along with a hat and glove marked by faint traces of blood. Nearby, several blood-stained tissues were frozen to the ground. Jeff organized a search with friends. Within 2 hours, after covering more than 20 kilometers, they found Bobby Joe's body. She had been shot twice. When police arrived, they faced a grim scene with very few clues. The only footprints in the snow belonged to Bobby and the search party. A plastic restraint was fastened around her wrist, and nearby lay a single, bright orange sock. That same night, police received a report that 21-year-old Annette Schnee was missing. Annette worked as a waitress in Frisco, Colorado, and like Bobby, she often hitchhiked to and from work. The similarity immediately linked the cases in investigators' minds. Following standard procedure, detectives first questioned Jeff Oberholzer. When asked whether he knew Annette, he initially said no. But after seeing her photograph in the news, he remembered picking her up once while she was hitchhiking and giving her his business card. He insisted he had never seen her again and denied any involvement in her disappearance or his wife's death. 6 months later, police received another call. A young woman's body had been found roughly 20 kilometers from where Bobby Joe had been discovered. It was Annette Schnee. Her remains were badly decomposed, but investigators noticed a chilling detail. On her left foot was a single, bright orange sock, the missing pair to the one found near Bobby Joe. Jeff's business card was discovered in Annette's wallet, and he quickly became the primary suspect. Detectives reconstructed a possible timeline. Annette had last been seen in Breckenridge around 4 p.m., speaking with an unidentified dark-haired woman. Investigators theorized that about an hour later, she began hitchhiking home and was picked up by Jeff. According to this hypothesis, he drove her down a remote road, assaulted her inside the car, and when she tried to escape, shot her. Her right sock, they believed, remained in the vehicle. They then suspected he went to collect Bobby. Perhaps she noticed the sock, sparking an argument. When she fled the car, she dropped it into the snow, and Jeff fired after her. Yet Jeff maintained he had an alibi, claiming he was at a friend's house during the time of Annette's death. 2 months later, he passed a polygraph test. With limited forensic technology available in the early 1980s and no stronger evidence, the case stalled for nearly a decade. In December 1990, detectives received new forensic results. The blood on Bobby's glove and on the tissues found in the field was re-examined using modern DNA testing. Investigators discovered it belonged not to Bobby, but to an unknown man, and it did not match Jeff Oberholzer. Attention shifted to other suspects. In February 1982, a taxi driver named Thomas Edward Luther had been arrested for attacking a young hitchhiker. While incarcerated, he reportedly boasted about being connected to a killing. His girlfriend claimed he had not returned home the night Bobby disappeared. Investigators hoped they had found their man, but DNA testing ruled him out. Another suspect, Tracy Petrocelli, who had killed his fiancée in 1981 and later committed additional crimes in other states, also came under scrutiny when detectives learned he had worked at the same hotel as Annette. Again, there was no match. It would take 40 years for the truth to emerge. On the night of January 6, 1982, during a fierce snowstorm with temperatures plunging toward -30 degrees, a sheriff from Breckenridge happened to be flying over a mountain pass on a commercial flight. Through the storm, he noticed flashing headlights below, a signal for help in Morse code. He alerted the crew, who radioed local emergency services. Within minutes, rescuers arrived. Fire Chief Dave Montoya recognized the stranded driver as Alan Lee Phillips, a former co-worker from the mines. Phillips explained that his truck had become stuck in the snow and that he had injured his face while trying to free it. He was rescued and sent on his way. Only on January 9, 2021, would police realize that Montoya had unknowingly saved a future suspect. A newly assigned detective on the Schnee Oberholzer case turned to a company specializing in genetic genealogy, United Data Connect. The preserved DNA sample from the blood on Bobby Joe's glove was sufficient to pursue advanced analysis. When uploaded to public genealogy databases, it produced a direct familial lead: 2 brothers, Bruce and Alan Phillips. Only one still lived in Colorado near Breckenridge and continued to work in the mines: Alan Lee Phillips. He was arrested at the age of 70 and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Investigators concluded that Bobby Joe had not been fleeing her husband that night, but Phillips. After offering her a ride, he diverted onto a remote road and began to harass her. Bobby struck him under the eye with a brass keychain Jeff had given her for protection. When she escaped the vehicle, she dropped Annette's orange sock, the clue that would later bind the 2 cases together. On November 7, 2022, Alan Lee Phillips was found guilty and sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms. Investigators believe he may be responsible for additional victims whose stories have yet to surface. Gail Bars. On October 9, 1988, Gail Bars was seen early in the morning leaving a cafe in Battle Creek, Michigan, in the company of an unidentified man. It was the last confirmed sighting of her alive. Gail's life had never been easy. She was a single mother, raising 3 children, and worked 2 jobs to keep her family afloat. When she disappeared, her eldest son, James, was the first to raise the alarm. For more than 2 weeks, there was no trace of her. Then, on October 25, 1988, hunters discovered her body near a river outside the town of Emmett, roughly 260 kilometers from Battle Creek. Evidence showed that Gail had been assaulted and then stabbed multiple times before her body was left by the roadside. Investigators collected every piece of available evidence, including biological samples, and interviewed witnesses. By the standards of the late 1980s, the investigation was thorough. A report spanning thousands of pages was compiled and filed with the sheriff's office. Just 3 days before Gail's body was found, a separate and seemingly unrelated event had taken place. 24-year-old Roger Plato was being pursued in connection with another case involving abduction and assault. A witness identified his vehicle, and officers moved in to arrest him. In a parking lot in Bellevue, as Plato approached his car, an officer drew his weapon and ordered him to lie face down. Plato resisted aggressively and attempted to seize the officer's gun. During the struggle, he was shot and died from his injuries before emergency services arrived. Before cremation, authorities decided to preserve a DNA sample from Plato because of the accusations against him. Even then, detectives suspected he might be connected to additional crimes. Their attention also turned to his friend and roommate, Richard Compton, a man with a lengthy criminal history. During questioning, Compton denied any involvement in Gail's death. With no direct evidence linking him to the case, investigators had no choice but to release him. For months, the investigation produced no new leads and gradually slipped into the archive of cold cases. Everything changed in 2018, when newly assigned Detective Scott Marshall reopened the file. Compton immediately drew his attention. To Marshall's surprise, he discovered that Compton's DNA had never been compared with the evidence collected from Gail's body. He set out to correct that oversight. By then, however, Compton had died in 2009 at the age of 59 and was buried in Austin, Texas. After a lengthy legal process, Marshall obtained permission for an exhumation and travelled to Texas. The results were disappointing. Compton's DNA did not match the profile recovered from Gail. There was, however, an unexpected development. The laboratory was able to extract a usable profile from. On August 30th, 1980, Stephanie Summers was supposed to spend the day with her nephew. It was the boy's birthday, and they had planned to celebrate together from morning until night. But Stephanie never arrived. Just a few hours later, she was found unresponsive inside her apartment. Stephanie was 36 and lived alone in the Silver Lake neighborhood of Los Angeles. Moving to California had been a lifelong dream, one she had worked toward for years. By 1980, she had finally achieved it, and friends later said she seemed genuinely happy with her new life. That summer morning, she was preparing to take her 11-year-old nephew, Kelly Roberts, to one of the largest amusement parks in the area. Kelly had been dreaming about the trip for weeks. He put on his favorite shirt and waited for his aunt to arrive. As the hours passed and she still did not appear, his family grew worried. Stephanie would never have broken a promise to a child without explanation. They contacted the local sheriff's department and asked officers to conduct a welfare check at her apartment. Los Angeles is a vast city, and beyond the time it would take to reach her home, Kelly's parents feared what they might find if something had gone wrong. Inside the unlocked apartment, officers encountered a devastating scene. Stephanie's body lay on the kitchen floor. Evidence showed that she had been assaulted and attacked multiple times with a sharp object, and she had also suffered heavy blows to the head. Forensic teams secured the apartment and carried out a careful examination, recovering biological evidence that would later prove crucial. Detectives interviewed neighbors and searched for witnesses, but the investigation soon stalled. There were no clear leads, and the case gradually faded into the background. Everything changed in 2014, when information from a prison informant pointed investigators toward Harold Anthony Parkinson, who was already serving a sentence for another killing. Records showed that Parkinson had lived less than 2 kilometers from Stephanie's apartment at the time of her death. When detectives compared his DNA with the sample preserved from the original investigation, they obtained a conclusive match. Parkinson's defense argued that the DNA could be explained by a prior consensual relationship. Prosecutors countered with testimony from Stephanie's friends and relatives, who explained that after a brief marriage she had come to understand her personal identity more clearly and was not involved with men at the time of her death. The trial stretched on as Parkinson maintained his innocence. On December 4, 2021, the jury returned its verdict. Harold Anthony Parkinson was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. After more than 4 decades, Stephanie Summers' case finally reached its conclusion. The next case would reveal a different path to the same destination, a story where time, technology, and persistence once again converged to uncover a truth that had been buried for years. Bonnie Baker. On the night of June 30th, 1998, Bonnie Baker was celebrating a long-awaited promotion with friends. The gathering was lively and warm, a small party in honor of her achievement. Later that evening, her boyfriend arrived to pick her up. After a series of tense exchanges, the couple left together. Bonnie was never seen alive again. 47-year-old Bonnie Baker lived in Denver, Colorado with her partner, Crispin Neen Perez. They had met while working at the same restaurant. Bonnie was known as a reliable employee, rarely absent and always punctual. Perez had a different reputation. A month before Bonnie's disappearance, he had been dismissed for repeated absences. While Bonnie's career was advancing, tensions in their relationship appeared to be growing. The party continued peacefully until Perez arrived uninvited. Witnesses later recalled that he immediately caused a disturbance. He reacted with visible jealousy when he saw Bonnie smiling and talking with others. Some guests believed he might have been under the influence of substances. His behavior was volatile, and the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Before leaving, Bonnie quietly told a friend that it was better to resolve the situation now than allow it to escalate later. Around 8 o'clock that evening, an anonymous woman called police to report a killing on West Louisiana Avenue. She claimed that the man responsible intended to flee to Mexico in a red car, transporting a body in the trunk. Investigators traced the call to a public phone, leaving them with little to go on except the address. When officers arrived, they found no visible signs of a struggle and no vehicle matching the description. The following day, Perez was involved in a traffic collision near Globe, Arizona. He abandoned the vehicle and disappeared. During a routine inspection, officers discovered traces of blood in the trunk. For reasons that remain unclear, the evidence was logged and archived without immediate connection to Bonnie's disappearance. The incident quickly faded from attention. Meanwhile, a young man reported his mother missing to Denver police. Whether due to oversight or poor communication between departments, the events of those 48 hours were never assembled into a single, coherent timeline. That gap would delay answers for decades. In the summer of 1999, more than a year after Bonnie was reported missing, two young men riding horses in a remote area of tribal land in New Mexico came across what appeared to be a human skull. Authorities were notified, and a shallow grave containing additional skeletal remains was uncovered. Identifying those remains would take another 13 years. In October 2012, Denver's cold case unit reopened Bonnie Baker's file. Working with representatives of the Navajo Nation, the FBI, and Denver's forensic laboratory, investigators confirmed that the remains found in 1999 belonged to Bonnie. A year later, after renewed witness interviews and forensic review, detectives concluded they had sufficient grounds to arrest Perez. It was difficult to ignore how differently the case might have unfolded had the initial emergency call been fully pursued in 1998. Then, in April 2013, the anonymous caller contacted police again. She admitted that she had made the original report and had helped clean the apartment after the incident. She described broken glass on the floor and an overturned kitchen table. She also provided a detailed description of the red Geo Prism and its license plate. Her identity and relationship to the couple have never been publicly disclosed. Crispin Neen Perez was extradited from Mexico to Denver in 2020 to face charges. In early 2022, he was convicted of kidnapping and first-degree murder and sentenced to 20 years in prison. If you found this video compelling, consider subscribing and supporting the channel. It helps me continue researching and telling stories like these. The next part of this series will be released on Wednesday, so make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on. You won't want to miss it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode. In April 2019, 78-year-old Terence Miller was arrested in connection with the attack and the killing of Jodi Loomis. Court proceedings began toward the end of 2020, but before the case could be completed, Miller died. Even so, investigators continued the process they had fought for over decades. A jury ultimately returned a guilty verdict on the most serious charge, and although legal arguments followed, the verdict remained in place. For the detectives who carried the case across nearly half a century, it was more than paperwork. It was a statement, not a threat, not a slogan, but a hard-earned truth. Time can hide a crime, but it cannot erase it forever. Saanich, British Columbia, 1987. Jay Cooke was 20. Tanya van Cuylenborg was 18. They'd met in high school, the kind of couple people remembered because they looked like they were building something careful and real. In November, they celebrated a small milestone, nothing grand, just that quiet, private happiness of two young people who believe time is on their side. Tanya was saving for a long-dreamed trip to the Netherlands, where her father's family lived. Jay was working hard too, shifts at a pizza place, extra work on a fishing boat, doing what you do when you're young and determined, and the future still feels negotiable. Then Jay's father offered them an errand that sounded almost like a mini adventure. Drive down to Seattle to pick up expensive furnace parts. A useful favour, and a chance to see the road together. So, on the evening of November 18th, 1987, they climbed into a bronze 1977 Ford Club Wagon van, his father's vehicle, and started south. They moved through familiar Canadian landscapes and toward the long spine of Highway 101 along the American coast, travelling by ferry in stages, Victoria to Port Angeles, then onward toward Bremerton and Seattle, a route that should have brought them home the very next day. But November 19th came and went, and they didn't return. At first, it was that specific kind of worry families recognize instantly. Not panic yet, but the sense that something has broken the pattern. When Jay's father realized his son never even arrived to collect the parts, the concern sharpened into dread. Police listed them as missing, and the search began. 5 days later, on November 24th, Tanya was found in a ditch beside a rural road near Alger, in Skagit County, Washington. The evidence told investigators she had been restrained, assaulted, and shot. With Jay still missing, suspicion briefly swung in the wrong direction. An understandable, tragic reflex when only one person has been found, and the other is still a question mark. That question was answered on Thanksgiving Day, November 26th. Nearly 100 kilometers away, a hunter walking his dog discovered Jay. He had been badly beaten and killed in a brutal, humiliating way, his body wrapped in a blue blanket that didn't belong to either victim, a detail that felt like a signature and a taunt at the same time. Soon after, Tanya's wallet and keys turned up near the Greyhound station in Bellingham. Not far from there, the bronze van was found abandoned. Inside were cable ties matching those used on Tanya, receipts and ferry tickets that confirmed their path, and scattered clues, gloves, stains, fragments of a story that refused to assemble into a face. On Tanya's pants, investigators collected biological evidence that would become the case's most stubborn promise. Not then, but someday. In 1987, DNA was only beginning to enter real-world investigations, and national databases were nothing like what they are now. Still, the team did something that would matter decades later. They preserved what they could, carefully, methodically, as if they were sealing time in an envelope. The years dragged on. There were cruel letters sent to the families, anonymous, descriptive, claiming responsibility, postmarked from far-flung cities, as if whoever wrote them wanted the grief to travel too. Police eventually identified the postcard writer years later, but did not link him to the killings. Meanwhile, the true offender remained out of reach, either never arrested for something that required DNA collection, or simply never on the radar at all. Then, in 2018, the case turned a corner. Investigators used genetic genealogy, the same broad idea that had recently helped identify other long-unknown offenders, and followed distant family connections hidden inside public genealogy data. 2 relatives had unknowingly opened a door. A cousin here, a cousin there, and suddenly a family tree began to take shape. Detectives narrowed it down to one man who fit the profile and the timeline: William Earl Talbot, Jr., living in SeaTac, Washington. To confirm it, they needed a direct comparison. So they watched, waited, and collected a discarded coffee cup, testing what was left behind. The DNA matched the preserved evidence. On May 17, 2018, Talbot was arrested. In 2019, a jury found him guilty, and he received life sentences. The case was widely described as a landmark, one of the first convictions driven by genetic genealogy presented in open court, where the method itself could be challenged and defended under scrutiny. But the story didn't end cleanly. In December 2021, an appeals court overturned the convictions, citing concerns about juror bias, specifically whether a juror who expressed hesitation about staying fully impartial should have remained on the panel. For the families, it was like being pulled back to the beginning after finally reaching the last page. Then, on December 22, 2022, the Washington State Supreme Court reinstated the guilty verdicts, rejecting the appeal and restoring the convictions. After more than 30 years, and after a detour through the legal system that threatened to unravel everything, the outcome returned to the same hard conclusion. The DNA did not lie, and the timeline finally held. And yet, even with a verdict restored, you can feel the cost in what was lost along the way. Tanya's parents died before they could see the full resolution. Jay's family carried the weight through every hearing, every headline, every reversal, holding on to the hope that the evidence preserved in 1987 would one day speak loudly enough to be heard. It did. It just took decades to find the moment, and the technology, that could translate it. Some stories do not end when the headlines fade. They linger in quiet rooms, in unopened files, in the long shadows cast by unanswered questions. For years they wait, patient and silent, until one day a single thread is pulled and the whole dark tapestry begins to unravel. If something about this story unsettled you, stay with me. Subscribe, because in the next chapter we step deeper into the places where forgotten truths are still breathing, waiting to be found.